Joe Rogan says the N-word.
Mr. Reagan.
Joe Rogan has become vilified because he had guests come on his show who criticized the vaccines. He's become vilified for a lot of other reasons too, actually. Liz Wheeler put it best, I think, when she tweeted, Rogan is up against Biden 2024, Fauci's 50-year grip on science, NIAID's billion-dollar enterprise, Big Pharma, Bill Gates, Chinese communists, Big Tech, Hollywood stooges, the mainstream media trained to defend it all, and the Democrats who profit from it all. Joe Rogan needs our support. I mean, honestly, like, everybody hates Joe Rogan for something. I mean, there's some guest that Joe Rogan's had on his show that just rubs leftists the wrong way. But the vaccine criticism is the thing that really got the left riled up against him. I don't know. I guess it was something that they thought that they could use to rally people against him with. The truth is that they hate Joe Rogan for going out and seeking out ideas that are not approved by the establishment. He's finding people who counter the establishment's narrative, and that's not allowed. It's kind of like how Trump was not allowed to be president because he wasn't one of the approved elites. And so Rogan is kind of, an unapproved heretic as well, who cannot be allowed to be just so influential. Now, they tried the same thing with Jordan Peterson, if you remember. They didn't like Jordan Peterson, and so they slandered him and basically just lied about him for years. To this day, people still think that Jordan Peterson is some kind of like white supremacist or something crazy ridiculous like that. Anyway, the thing that they pounced on Joe Rogan for was the vaccine stuff. The claim was, of course, that Rogan was spreading disinformation. But here's the thing. Joe Rogan doesn't really make any claims on his show. I mean, he does sometimes, but for the most part, he brings on experts, and those experts make the claims. Now, he spoke about this in his response to the backlash against him.
The podcast has been accused of spreading dangerous misinformation, specifically about two episodes, one with Dr. Peter McCullough and one with Dr. Robert Malone. Dr. Peter McCullough is a cardiologist, and he is the most published physician in his field in history. Dr. Robert Malone owns 9 patents on the creation of mRNA vaccine technology and is at least partially responsible for the creation of the technology that led to mRNA vaccines. Both these people are very highly credentialed, very intelligent, very accomplished people, and they have an opinion that's different from the mainstream narrative. I wanted to hear what their opinion is. The problem I have with the term misinformation, especially today, is that many of the things that we thought of as misinformation just a short while ago are now accepted as fact. Like, for instance, 8 months ago, if you said, if you get vaccinated, you can still catch COVID and you can still spread COVID, you would be removed from social media. Now, that's accepted as fact. If you said, I don't think cloth masks work, you would be banned from social media. Now, that's openly and repeatedly stated on CNN. If you said, I think it's possible that COVID-19 came from a lab, you'd be banned. Now, that's on the cover of Newsweek. All of those theories that at one point in time were banned were openly discussed by those two men that I had on my podcast that have been accused of dangerous misinformation. I do not know if they're right. I don't know, because I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist. I'm just a person who sits down and talks to people and has conversations with them.
The way a society progresses, the way we solve problems in our society is by discussion, all right? If you remove our ability to discuss, to dissent against the establishment narrative of things, well, then we stop progressing, all right? Instead, what happens is we regress. We go backwards. And this is especially true about critical issues like vaccines and COVID. If the left doesn't like what Dr. Malone is saying, well, they shouldn't try to stop him speaking. Instead, Fauci should just go on Rogan with Malone and explain why Malone is a fool. But that will never happen because Fauci knows that the opposite will happen, right? Dr. Malone will make Fauci look like a fool, and neither Fauci nor his worshipers want that. And so there is no discussion. There is only censorship. Joe Rogan has become necessary because the mainstream media has stopped doing its job. If Americans trusted the mainstream media, they would not be looking for alternative news sources. The comedian Whitney Cummings actually put it very well. She posted on Twitter, Don't look to why so many people trust Joe Rogan. Look to why so few people trust the mainstream media. That is exactly right. Rogan is popular not because he's always right, but because unlike mainstream news media, he has a genuine interest in learning the truth. And so do most Americans. And because of this, criticisms of Joe Rogan fall flat. How dare you have an expert on your show that says things that I don't like? I mean, it's just not a compelling argument. And so the left has now resorted to the same attack that they always make when they've lost, when they have no good argument left, when they're desperate. They're now just calling Joe Rogan a racist. Apparently, Joe Rogan has spoken the N-word many times, openly and publicly. Not to denigrate black people, but just talking about the word or using it in a quote that when somebody else said it. But regardless of his intent, somebody has compiled every instance that they could find of Joe Rogan saying the N-word, and this video is going viral amongst bitter leftists. I'll play this video in one moment. First, I have to sell you something. It's a new year and not much has changed. Houses are still selling in like a week. Interest rates are at zero. Our government is still borrowing money. Printing money. 5 trillion to be exact. What could possibly go wrong? Meanwhile, consumer confidence has hit a 10-year low. Inflation's hit 6.8%, with parts of the U.S. seeing rates as high as 8%. Something is not adding up. So what can you do? Well, you can play it safe. Put some of your assets in precious metals. This will keep your money away from the volatility of the markets. It'll keep it away from inflation, and it will let you sleep at night. Now this month, Noble Gold is giving away a free 1/10 ounce solid gold American Eagle coin with any qualifying plan that you start. So talk to an expert at Noble Gold and they'll run you through your options for keeping your money safe. There's no pressure, there's no hassle, there's no call centers. You just get a chance to speak with somebody who knows what they're talking about for once. How refreshing is that? Call Noble Gold at 877-646-5347 or visit their website at noblegoldinvestments.com. That's noblegoldinvestments.com. As I said, when Joe Rogan is using the N-word here, he's referring to the word. He's not calling somebody the N-word.
For a long time, when I would bring that word up, like if it would come up in conversation, instead of saying the N-word, I would just say the word. I thought as long as it was in context, people would understand what I was doing. Like that context was part of the clip we were talking about Red Fox, how Red Fox said that word on television in the 1970s, and how times have changed so much since then. Or about how Richard Pryor used it as one of the titles of one of his albums. Or I was quoting a Lenny Bruce bit, or I was quoting a Paul Mooney bit, or I was talking about how Quentin Tarantino used it repeatedly in Pulp Fiction. Or I was talking about how a Netflix executive, ironically, used it because he was trying to compare it to another offensive word, and he said it out loud, and they fired him. Not calling anybody or just saying the word out loud. I was also talking about how there's not another word like it in the entire English language, because it's a word where only one group of people is allowed to use it, and they can use it in so many different ways. Like if a white person says that word, it's racist and toxic, but a black person can use it and it could be a punchline. It could be a term of endearment. It could be lyrics to a rap song. It could be a positive affirmation. It's a very unusual word. For years, I used it in that manner. I never used it to be racist.
But as I suggested before, this really isn't about COVID misinformation. This isn't about Joe's use of the N-word. This is about Joe Rogan not conforming to leftist dogma. He's not been approved, and so he's not allowed to have so much influence over the populace. And what's really revealing about this dynamic, and pretty funny actually, is that part of the reason that this little compilation went viral is that it was shared with The Rock, Dwayne Johnson. And The Rock was like, "Oh crap, thanks for bringing this to my attention. I totally hate Joe Rogan now." I mean, that was, of course, idiotic by itself. But what's really funny is that the guy who shared this video with The Rock, he's a famous novelist that I've never heard of named Don Winslow. And Don Winslow is a total degenerate Trump-hating leftist. I mean, this guy has Trump derangement syndrome times like a million. He is a completely zombified Trump hater. But anyway, after this guy shared this compilation video with The Rock and tried to get everybody to hate Joe Rogan, somebody on Twitter, somebody called Wocal Distance, did some digging into Don Winslow's novels, and it turns out, no joke, this guy used the N-word more than Quentin Tarantino. This guy, he must like love the N-word or something. He's like obsessed with it. That word is used profusely throughout like all of his novels. And it's not even with like the GGA ending. Oh no. This guy uses the hard R every single time. The hypocrisy is amazing. However, even so, that doesn't really address Joe Rogan's use. So let me do that now. Now, I've explained that Joe Rogan always used the N-word in a sort of academic sense. That is, he refers to it while he's discussing the word itself or quoting from others. But that doesn't really get him off the hook for some people out there because, he could always have used the term the N-word. It's a perfectly good alternative. It's easy. Nobody's going to be upset with you for using it. So why not? Well, there's some principles involved here, and principles that I quite understand. Now, if you're not a racist, the use of that word should not be perceived as pejorative. Furthermore, a comfort in using the word actually kind of indicates a confidence that one is, in fact, not racist. But perhaps most importantly, the use of a word like that should not be prohibited from anyone who is not using it in a pejorative manner. It just should not be prohibited. It's stupid that it is. And these, I think, were the principles that Joe Rogan was standing for when he was using that word. And the reason I think that is because if I were to use that word, those would be the principles that I would be standing for. And maybe that doesn't do it for you. Maybe you still don't think Joe Rogan should have used that word. But let me just say this. Joe Rogan is a provocateur. You've got to remember that for a long time, Joe Rogan was doing stand-up comedy, and part of his comedic angle was to provoke thought, to provoke emotion. And, this is a common tactic with comedy, and it works. Comics are always looking to push the boundaries of what's socially acceptable. That's part of their place in our society. And the same way that he tries to provoke people in stand-up, Joe Rogan tries to provoke thought through his podcast. The N-word, in a way, is clickbait, right? You say it, it provokes people. They start to think about things like, oh, wait, is that appropriate for him to use? Stuff like that. And I think that's actually good. I think it's a good thing to do to try to make people think. Now, is that the best way to do it? I don't know. Probably not. That's up for you to decide. But it certainly doesn't mean somebody's a racist. And that's really the point, isn't it? The point is whether or not Joe Rogan was using the N-word maliciously. That's the point. And that's the only point that matters. And what I'm trying to explain here is that the answer to that question is no. No, he was not. And I have felt for a long time that this word has way too much power in our society. It would be great if we could talk about the N-word and actually say the word, but we can't. It's ridiculous that we just have to say the letter N, right? And then people, understand what we're saying. If you're not actually a racist, then it shouldn't matter. Joe Rogan understood this. He understood how absurd this idiotic rule is that white people can't say this one word, even when you're not using it malevolently in your heart, and so he was in the past openly referring to the N-word. And again, I do think that there was some sense of like, well, if I use the N-word, it should indicate to people that I'm comfortable using this word because I'm not a racist, right? I think that was probably something in his thinking. And I don't know if that's a good strategy, but in terms of people who don't have malevolence when they're using that word, when they're not saying it as a pejorative, I'm with it. Unfortunately, though, I do recognize that this word will never be considered acceptable to be used by polite society. And so I think, using it as a matter of principle is kind of futile. But I do appreciate what he was trying to do, at least what I suspect he was trying to do. But the left does not care about intent. And that's really the distinction between the right and the left. The left does not care about your intent. The left considers racism something that you do. They believe that you can be racist by accident. But that's, of course, absurd. The truth is that racism is not something that you do. It's not something that you can do by accident. Racism is something that you believe. No one can determine for you whether or not you're a racist. That's something you got to decide for yourself. And that's true no matter what the degenerate leftists tell you. And so, no, Joe Rogan is not a racist. Now, I don't always agree with Joe Rogan, and I'm very happy to criticize the man. And there is one major criticism that I have of him now, and it's the same criticism that a lot of you have of him at the moment. He apologized.
My sincere and humble apologies. I wish there was more that I could say, but all of this is just me talking from the bottom of my heart. It makes me sick watching that video, but hopefully at least some of you will accept this and understand where I'm coming from. My apologies and much love. My sincere, deepest apologies.
Look, if you say something and the left points to you and says, that guy's a racist for saying that thing, if you're not actually a racist, do not apologize. All right, just say, look, if you want to think I'm a racist, I can't stop you. But that's on you. That's your delusion. That's not the truth. And then move on. Now, a lot of people are mad at Joe Rogan for apologizing, and I understand that. I, too, believe that the apology was a mistake. But, I would advise everybody to go easy on him. He's under a lot of pressure, and I think he genuinely feels bad for saying the N-word in the past. So, if he wants to apologize, that's on him. I can only guess that the reason that he apologized, at least in part, is that he was pressured to do so by Spotify. And, to Spotify's credit, they have said that they're going to stand behind Joe Rogan. They're going to keep his show on Spotify, and everything's cool between them. Spotify did remove dozens of episodes from the Joe Rogan show. They put out a statement claiming that Joe Rogan himself removed these episodes, but I don't believe that for a second. Now, after this whole thing blew up, the free speech YouTube alternative Rumble offered Rogan to jump ship from Spotify and to join their site, and they offered Joe Rogan $100 million. Now, that is precisely the same deal that he got for joining Spotify in the first place, and so I don't know what that deal would be if Rogan did leave Spotify, but I'm guessing he would still get quite a lot of money, plus the new $100 million from Rumble, and that is a pretty good deal. But I don't think Rogan's going to take it. Spotify has been standing behind Rogan, more or less, and honestly, it would be truly moronic for Spotify to drop Rogan now. After all, as Trump says in The Art of the Deal, there's no such thing as bad press. Or, to quote Trump exactly, good publicity is preferable to bad. But from a bottom line perspective, bad publicity is sometimes better than no publicity at all. Controversy, in short, sells. Truly wise advice. Now, I want to make something clear. This is a fake scandal. CNN and MSNBC hate Joe Rogan because he's doing the reporting that they are not doing. He's bringing on the guests that they should be bringing on, but they're not because of political reasons. They become leftist propaganda, and Rogan has become a platform for genuine, thought-provoking dialogue. So the mainstream media hates Joe Rogan, and leftist politicians hate him because, these people are trying to control the minds of the populace, and platforms like Joe Rogan's show make that difficult. And so these folks are trying to destroy Joe Rogan in any way they can. They're trying to create phony scandals where no real scandal exists. And when you focus on these phony scandals, you distract people from real scandals. And in this case, we're ignoring real racism while stoking a moral panic about phony racism. As I've said many times on this channel, there is a racism problem in America, but it's not racism coming from white people. It's racism against white people. I'm posting another video shortly about the racism in the black community exposed by the tweets that they post on Twitter. Now, here are a few examples of what you're going to see in that upcoming video. White people, don't trust them. White people make my stomach turn, I swear. Charming. White people, the laziest MFs I ever met. Gonna become a police officer so I can racially profile and target white people. Oh, isn't that sweet? The only white people I F with also hate white people. White people so rude, bruh. Like mad ain't got no flavor, honey. I'll be perfectly honest, I don't completely understand that sentence. And look, this is not a trivial matter. I mean, those tweets are kind of funny because they're so ridiculous, but black racism is a genuine problem in America for a variety of reasons. For one thing, it keeps our country divided. It causes a lot of animosity, and it distracts people from being productive, from self-improvement, and from other constructive pursuits. It encourages discrimination against white people for education and for jobs, and it encourages violence against white Americans, and even murder. I've collected a lot of examples of this over the years doing my show. This is a serious problem, but perhaps those hurt most by black racism against white people in America is black people themselves. This kind of racism limits the potential of black children. If you tell a black child that he cannot succeed because white people are all horrible, how do you think that affects their future? It's not good. When you tell a child that they shouldn't speak proper English because doing so makes them too white, that they should not study for school because that's a white thing, how do you think that affects them? You're creating a series of unnecessary impediments to future success. You are hurting the very people that you are so keen on helping. Focusing on fake scandals like Joe Rogan's use of a bad word keeps people's focus not just on problems that we've long moved past in this country, but keeps some people focused on problems that don't actually exist, or insignificant problems that are blown way out of proportion. Joe Rogan is not a racist. This is a fake scandal. Fortunately, Spotify is not bowing to the woke mob, and they're not canceling him. Thank goodness they're a Swedish company. I predict the whole thing will be all but forgotten in a month. A few race baiters will keep bringing it up for the next year or so, but eventually it'll be forgotten entirely. And listen, if you're a leftist and you're bothered by that prediction, don't worry too much. There's going to be another fake scandal for you guys to lose your mind over soon enough. Well, that's it for me. And remember, it's not that our liberal friends are ignorant. It's just they know so much that is not so. Good night.
The goal for all of us should be that one day things will be done neither because of nor in spite of any of the differences between us, ethnic differences or racial differences, whatever they may be, that we will have total equal opportunity for all people. And I would do everything I could in my power to bring that about.